online. The 5-page letter of objection to this application from Natural Resources Wales of June 2018, again referred to by the case officer in her report, is damning in its comments about the developer's failure to address fundamental issues about the flood consequence assessment and providing escape routes in the event of an extreme flooding event. Expert advice we have taken said that these objections are insurmountable. As we know from the Spa Hotel application, which we all supported, NRW have the power to influence the Welsh Government to call in any application they object to. The Dixon site flooded extensively in 2014 and has flooded before. Will the operators of the site be able to secure insurance if the land floods? And if it does so repeatedly, will they just abandon the site, leaving an eyesore at this gateway to Wales? If we can now look at the need for the Marston's pub, it was mentioned in the first retail impact assessment that the Marston's pub and restaurant would offer a different dining experience. However, a 2017 report states, in inverted commas, because Monmouth residents are relatively well provided for by bar restaurant facilities in the town centre, the weight to be attached to this benefit should be considered against any disbenefits, including diversions of A3 custom from the town centre. The town's pub sector is already under threat, with both the Gloucester and Three Horseshoes closing since the retail impact assessment was undertaken. In conclusion, therefore, the proposed site is located on the edge of the Wye Valley AONB and is at the entrance to the Lower Wye Valley, which has been a magnet for visitors since the Wye Tour of 1780. Monmouth is a centre for education, retains many features of its historical past, has a strong musical heritage, which all work to create its uniqueness. No town ever had its uniqueness improved by an out-of-town retail development. We fully support the recommendation of the case officer and trust you will support her detailed analysis and us by refusing this application outright. Many thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Enjoy your retirement also, but it's been good to see you in the committee, attending committee. Do you wish to comment, Phil? No. Right, so we'll go on now to those of the committee who wishes to comment. I believe, Councillor Feakin, you're the nearest to the application site. If you'd like to give your comments now, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd quite simply like to move the officer's recommendation to refuse. I think they're just, and I think, as has been explained to us, it's been through a very long and thorough process to get to this point. It's been presented as well as it possibly could be presented, but there are obstacles which cannot be overcome, and so I'd move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Feakin. Anybody else wish to comment? Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I'd like to second that. The only thing I would say is that had it been an application just for the public house, I might have had to think a little bit harder about it. But clearly, we have to take the whole application as one. I support the officer's view, so I'll second the refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Anybody else wish to comment? I also understand where Councillor Murphy is coming from, as it is a very overgrown site now, and I remember only too well of the large house, the red brick house that was there. I'd never known it to flood, and I do think perhaps we are lacking with hotel space in Monmouth for visitors, and it doesn't really gauge you into Monmouth the way it is presented at the moment with just a big overgrown area. But I can understand that we deal with the application that is in front of us now today. Councillor Feakin has proposed refusal, seconded by Councillor Murphy. So could I please have a show of hands for refusal? That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Right, we now go to 00280. This is Thornycroft, North Road, the North Monmouth. on pages 49 to 60. And I believe this is your application, Andrew. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Sorry. We'll wait a moment for Councillor Dovey to come back to the chamber. Right, thank you, Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is a full application for the demolition of an existing dwelling and garage and the construction of 2 detached dwellings, both with detached carports. This is a site within the village of the Narth and is also set within the Wye Valley AONB. To note, the application is presented to members today as there have been objections from more than 5 separate households. A number of the members were on site yesterday, but for the benefit of those that weren't, I'll just quickly run through the site photographs. So that's the existing dwelling that is proposed to be demolished. So that's a view looking out from out of the site. That's the existing garage, again to be demolished. A view from within the garden, I think it's looking towards the east. Further view of the existing dwelling, I think most of the others then. That's looking at the existing entrance from within the site. I think all other views then are just from within the existing extensive garden. So, as stated, the site is located towards the entrance of the village. As you can see, they're marked with the pinpoint on the sort of western periphery of the village. And that's the existing layout there, showing a slightly off-centre access. So the proposed layout would see the existing entrance closed with a new central access serving both properties, as you can see on the screen. An existing dwarf wall located along the front of the site would be adapted and retained and reduced to a height of 250 millimetres. As you can see from the layout, detached timber carports would be located to the rear of each dwelling, and while 6 trees would be felled, it is proposed to plant 40 new trees and other hedge planting as shown on the site layout on screen. The dwellings themselves would be 5-bed and would feature staggered projecting gables to the front. External materials would include natural stone and render, natural roof slate, and powder-coated grey aluminium doors and windows. Both dwellings would also feature a single-storey orangery-style element to the rear. So with regards to detailed considerations, the Narth is classified as a minor village within the LDP, within which infill development is considered acceptable in principle, subject to detailed considerations. As the proposal would result in a net gain of 1 dwelling, Policy S4 requires in principle a financial contribution to be provided in respect of local affordable housing. In this instance, the applicant has provided a detailed viability review, which has been run against the Council's toolkit. The results show that no contribution would be viable, and accordingly no contribution is sought. It is considered the replacement of the existing dwelling and the addition of a second dwelling to the east would be acceptable within the form of the village. The existing dwelling itself is not of such architectural value so as to warrant retention, and therefore there is no objection in principle to its demolition. The village contains a variety of house types and plot sizes. However, the area is generally characterised by hedgerows bounding the highway, with generous spaces between dwellings and the presence of mature vegetation. The dwellings themselves, as you can see on screen, are of comparable width to others in the locality, and further details is provided on that in the officer's report. The plot itself is considered to be of sufficient size to accommodate 2 dwellings that would allow both to enjoy generous garden plots. The staggered gables to the front of each would help to break them up, as well as add visual interest. The use of high-quality materials such as natural stone and natural roof slate is welcomed and responsive to the rural character of the village. The integration of the dwellings into the established street scene would be further assisted with a significant net gain of new trees on site, particularly when these have matured. Policy LC4 seeks to safeguard the Wye Valley AONB and it is clear that any development should be subservient to the primary purpose to conserve and enhance the natural beauty of the area. A total of 6 criteria set out within that policy, and your officers are satisfied that the proposal accords with these and would conserve and enhance the unique character and qualities of the landscape. As stated previously, a new shared access is proposed, with the existing entrance to be closed. A shared access is preferable in principle to highway safety terms to avoid potential points of conflict onto the highway, and the proposed visitor display is considered acceptable to serve 2 separate dwellings. The site also contains sufficient parking space, which to see 3 spaces per dwelling, as well as room for both vehicles of both sites to turn within the site and enter the carriageway in a forward gear. Accordingly, no objection has been raised from the Council's highway engineer, and the proposal is considered to accord with policy MV1. Owing to the size of the plots and the absence of habitable room windows at first floor level to the side elevations, the proposal is not considered to result in the loss of any amenity to third parties. A condition would be attached requiring a construction environment management plan that would safeguard species at the site, such as nesting birds, dormice and reptiles. Additional survey work in respect of bats has also been undertaken at the request of the Council's ecologist, which did find no evidence of bats using the existing buildings. Local concerns have been raised with respect of surface water drainage and the potential for flash flooding impacts on the public highway. However, the site is not within a designated flood zone, and it's also pertinent to note that the scheme would now require separate approval from the Council's Sustainable Drainage Approval Body, as per the new legislation in January of this year, which would require detailed consideration of drainage matters. Therefore, in light of all that, subject to the conditions set out in the officer's report, the application is presented to members today with a recommendation to approve.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Several members were there at the site visit yesterday. The local member is a member of the planning committee, but she's not with us today, so I'll leave it open to any of those who wish to make comment. I believe we have an objector who wanted to speak, but are you still speaking? Yes, well, if you'd like to take the stand, you'll have 4 minutes. Please state your name and you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Susan Goodless, and I've been asked by a group of residents to come along today to identify some of the reasons and the policies behind why we think this development is inappropriate in the position it is in our village. The proposal contains aspects which we believe are contrary to the following policies. Sustainable drainage, which is SD4 and TAN 15, they've already been mentioned. The affordable housing and the development in minor villages policies. Placemaking and design and the LC4 area of outstanding natural beauty. And there are a number of paragraphs in the LDP which we also think are affected. So if I hope I'll cover all those as I go through. First of all, there isn't a sustainable drainage system plan, and we understand that the area in question, although it isn't in a flood zone, the planning committee are allowed to consider areas where third parties may adversely be affected by any increased risk of flood or runoff. There are a number of objections already on the planning site indicating that residents have grave concerns about the drainage levels in that area and their previous experiences and methods of trying to deal with that themselves. The planning officer indeed recognises that a number of concerns have been raised about drainage in the local area, but her report doesn't contain any conditions at the moment relating to having a SUDS prepared before a decision is made on the appropriateness of the development in the location. There are a couple of questions raised actually by the planning officer's report. They may have been already relayed to you and explained, but for the residents, they're still questions. Paragraph 1.4 actually refers to car parking for a further 2 dwellings. We don't understand that. There are a number of plans which are listed in the officer's report, including at least one which isn't available to see on the planning site. There are some inconsistencies between the plans, so we would request, for the avoidance of any doubt of what is actually going to be allowed to be built, then we should have a clear, accurate and consistent and complete set of plans before a decision is actually made. And then we can all have a look and comment appropriately on them. The gentleman who talked about the planning officer's report mentioned the frontages of the properties are similar to those in the local area. The frontage of 3 nearby properties include integral garages, and these effectively don't. The footprint, rather than the width of the properties, was what was originally mentioned in the design and access statement. And it's quite clear to local residents that the proposed dwelling footprints are both double those of their immediate neighbours. So we think they're a bit big compared to adjacent dwellings. The landscaping is cited in the report as very significant mitigations to all the villagers' concerns about the size, scale and visual impact of the development. But we are concerned that although Condition 8 might be placed on the planning conditions, then there isn't really much that we can do about enforcing the planning conditions. So if we understand that Technical Advisory Note 10 state that the planning committee can propose TPOs to protect and secure any trees or vegetation which is planted to fulfil conditions. And so we would at least request that any TPOs can be placed on the trees in accordance with the planting plan.
Could you please wind up? You've had 4 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, will do. The two more concerns. The highway fronting the northern boundary of the plot is a de-restricted 60 miles per hour road. The equivalent 30 mile per hour eastwards, that's from the village, visibility is what's stated in the plans. We don't think that's big enough because it's a 60 mile an hour road coming out of the village. And finally, the main concern that's been raised has been about an access road going through the development, leading to a potential future development of a field beyond, which is a candidate site in the new LDP. So to avoid any doubt, we would respectfully request that a condition should be placed on the development preventing access through the development to the candidate site, or that the decision should be deferred until the new LDP is published. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, who wishes to have a right of reply to that? Thank you. Please state your name as well, and you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Elliot Pardington. I'm the applicant's agent for this matter. I'll restrict my response to the issues that have been raised by the objector. First of all, with regard to drainage, there's no evidence to suggest that the proposals will result in danger of flooding. A comprehensive sustainable urban drainage scheme has been prepared and submitted to Monmouthshire County Council in their role as the sustainable drainage approving body. The SUD scheme is based on site soakaway and percolation tests, which indicate that the site is likely to be suitable for soakaway surface drainage and for treated effluent from septic tanks via conventional drainage field. All paved areas within the development are proposed to be permeable and will therefore be self-draining. With regard to conditions that the objector has suggested in connection with drainage, I would suggest there's no condition required, as the SUD's approval is a separate application process, and no development is possible on the site unless that has been approved. With regard to the size of the dwellings and the frontages, what we would say is that the North is made up and derives part of its character from the existing built form, having a mixture of styles and sizes, including many of which are significantly larger than the houses proposed at Thornycroft. The existing buildings at the site have a footprint of approximately 180 metres squared, and the replacement of a single dwelling with 2 houses will normally result in a significant increase in footprint. Twin Oaks, which is immediately to the west, has a footprint of the region of 111 square metres, and White Rose, the next plot to the east, has a footprint of approximately 180 square metres. I understand that there has been some questioning of the footprint calculations, but I can confirm that mine were taken from an digital ordnance survey extract. The applicant is developing the site as a commercial venture, and cost plans submitted to the council as part of the 106 exercise illustrate that the commercial viability of the project is not yet certain. And in order to maximise the potential market value of the proposed houses, it's been necessary to maximise their size. The dwellings have a ridge height which is about 150 millimetres lower than the adjacent property, Twin Oaks. The objector, suggested that maybe integral garages would be appropriate, but there's been a lot of objection on the basis that people feel this is not an area where suburban buildings should be built, and I would suggest that integral garages are more indicative of suburban development. With regard to the suggestion that possibly the applicants may wish to remove some of the trees or not complete the planting scheme that's been submitted, I can confirm that the applicant value the trees. They feel that it's an integral part of the value of the site and integral to the resale value of the properties. So we wouldn't have any objection to a condition being added that would insist that the existing trees are retained. Obviously, the trees that are proposed will be conditioned as part of the landscaping proposal, so hopefully there wouldn't be an issue there. With regard to highways and access and visibility, yes, the road is in a 60-mile-per-hour limit. I would say that coming out of the village, the alignment of the road, I think, restricts speed of traffic there, and I think that's been taken into account by Monmouthshire Highways, who were consulted. They are content that the proposed parking, site layout, access and visibility are suitable, and they support the approval of the application. With regard to the land at the rear of the sites, our applicant has no interest in that land, so we don't have any concerns about anything in connection with that. Nothing more to say in that regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, I think the closest member's ward to that would be Councillor Webb. Thank you.
That Trellick United Community Council have particularly asked to attend this planning meeting when it's discussed, and I don't know if there's anybody here from the Community Council.
No, there's been no comment. Thank you.
As I wasn't on the site visit yesterday, Madam Chairman, going back to your original comments, I prefer to leave them until after other members have made theirs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Members then that were there yesterday. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just one of the points that was picked up, the last point that was brought about, the potential access to the LDP candidate site. I think when we looked at it yesterday, that had actually been blanked off on the plans. There was no. It stops quite a fair bit short now, doesn't it? Am I correct in thinking that?
Yeah, yes, Councillor Murphy, you are correct. You can see on the this is the updated proposed layout and planting plan that's available online. You can see that southern boundary there is now, perhaps, Ruth, could you point that there? That is now closed off with planting rather than the access road coming through the entire site. So that sort of terminates before the end of the site.
Okay, and with regards to tree preservation orders, we're happy that we're looking after any trees that are suitable to be protected. I know there were some there that were effectively weeds, and you weren't going to have a problem with it, but there were some nice trees on site, I thought.
Yeah, there are a number of nice mature trees on site. There's no specific TPOs on site, but those that have been identified for removal have been carefully considered by the council's tree officer, who is satisfied with the compensation through the additional net gain of planting of a variety of trees.
Okay, well, those were my concerns. Having been on site, Chair, this is quite a substantial plot. It will easily take two properties, and I didn't feel that they would detract at all from the general layout of the village. The current plot is an absolute eyesore. I don't know how long it's been abandoned, but obviously quite some time now. I've got no reason to do anything other than vote for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Maureen Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor Murphy just said at the last minute what I was going to say. When we looked at the building that was there yesterday, it's in such poor condition, what you can see of it, that I think, and you know, it needs something doing there because it is an eyesore in itself. And I too feel that there is plenty of room for the two properties without imposing on the surrounding area, and I would second the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. But Councillor Feakin.
Thank you, Chair. And just very briefly, just to reinforce some of those points, we have enabling policies to enable development. This is a good development. We desperately need houses. It's a shame it's not bringing forward any affordable housing contributions, but I understand it's gone through the process. It's gone through the process. So I'd happily endorse the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Feakin. Councillor Clark.
Yeah. Could we just put up the elevations, please? Yeah, I'm just slightly concerned. You know what my bane is, but the roof over. If we've got to have decent roofs on large houses, and I just feel looking at those, they're a bit scant. And can our officers please sort the detail out of those roofs with the applicant before we approve?
Chair, if I may, sorry, just to clarify it, probably for the benefit of the attendees rather than ourselves, but you're thinking in the realms of 150 mm overhangs that you're normally seeking, that kind of thing. Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment? I don't know what the driveway was supposed to be. Is it permeable tarmac or shingle stuff or pebbles or what? Thank you very much, because I do think that on these narrow lanes we don't need gravel or whatever going out onto the byroads. Thank you. So it has been proposed by Councillor Murphy for approval, seconded by Councillor Powell. Could I have a show of hands for approval, please? That's unanimous. We now go to page 81. To pages 90, 00564, and it is Trefgarn, Chapel Lane, Pulmerich. Whose is this? Right. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, application is DM 2019-00564. It's at Trefgarn on Chapel Lane in Pulmerich. The application, this is the plan of the site and of the area. As you can see, this located there to the east along Chapel Lane. The application itself is for the erection of a dormer bungalow. Trefgarn was actually approved as a replacement dwelling in 2015. So this application, if you go to the next slide, please, Phil. These are photographs of the site members would have seen yesterday along the rural lane and Chapel Lane. So it's mature hedgerows. This is a photograph of the access to the site and the neighbouring property. This is a photograph of the site. So the proposed development is going to be within the front garden there of the property, Trefgarn. This is a photograph of the plot. And this is a photograph looking back along Chapel Lane, looking at the access and the plot. So this is the existing site. You can see the plot there with Trefgarn on with the detached garage. And this is a proposal for the proposed site plan for the development. So the proposed dormer type bungalow would be sited within the front garden of Trefgarn. It would have the same finished floor level of 100, so it would be level with the existing property, and be 12.2 metres by 8 metres. It's been designed to be similar design to the existing property, and
also to have a ridge height of approximately 6.2 metres. And it's a 4-bedroom property. This is the proposed elevations, and members on site would have seen that it mimics the exact design of what Trefgarn has been designed as. It's a 4-bedroom bungalow. This is a proposed street scene, so you can see the implications it would have on the street, and you can see that it would be lower than the existing property, and it would also be lower than the neighbouring property, Broadlands, as well. So there'd be a hierarchy along the road, and this is the elevation to show that in terms of the impact it would have. The site is located within Polmeric's development boundary, and it is also east of Mavon's conservation area, and also part of Wyland's estate, historic park and garden. As you can see outlined in the report, Mavon Community Council has objected to the proposed development based on it being overdevelopment, the impact that it had on the neighbouring properties, and the amount of traffic that the development would generate. Highways have reviewed the proposed development and have no objections to the proposals. In terms of the amount of parking provision the development provides, it would have an integral garage, and also there's sufficient parking on the site. The amount of traffic movement that this property would generate is considered to be limited and therefore would be acceptable. You'll also see in 5.2 there are a number of objections to the proposed development from neighbouring properties relating to inadequate access, parking provision, impact on privacy, as long as a list of other concerns there with regards to the building line and this break in that building line. As officers, we have considered the proposed development, and on balance, we do feel the site does have sufficient space to provide a plot for the dwelling. If you go back to the location plan, Phil, the first plan we've shown. Next one. Yeah, keep going, go back. If you actually that one on the side, the location plan, you can see that it's quite unique in terms of the development in Polmeric. It does lend itself for a plot, whereas other plots in the area wouldn't be able to do that. And given the rural lane and the way that there isn't a definitive building line in the officer's opinion, on balance, we do feel this site does have enough space to accommodate a dwelling. It's also a sustainable location in line with PPW and the transport hierarchy. There's a bus route and it's very close to Chepstow, so we do think it's an appropriate place to allow a dwelling to go. In terms of design and placemaking, it does mimic the existing high standard design of Trefgarn. We feel that that's appropriate. It would appear to be a dormer bungalow, so it wouldn't be too dominant on Chapel Lane. The proposed materials and design of the building are considered to be acceptable. In terms of impact on neighbouring properties, members who were on site yesterday and noticed that we did go and look at it from the neighbouring property. We considered the ridge height of 6.2 not to be overbearing, and there's enough intervening distance. The dwelling is sited 6 metres from the common boundary with number 21 Orchard Close, and there's also considered to be a significant distance on their side. There's also no first level windows on that side, on that elevation. Go back to the proposed site plan, Phil. Looking down south, there would be no first floor windows on that elevation, so there's no difference in someone standing in that garden looking in that direction now, in terms of the impact on their privacy. And also the property to the north, Brooklands, there's 15 metres from that first floor window to that common boundary, and that is considered in planning terms to be acceptable intervening distance. So for all that reason and rationale, planning officers are outlining that the application should be recommended for approval. You will have noticed in my email to members earlier on today that the affordable housing contribution that we're seeking for this development has changed in light of the adoption of the revised supplementary planning guidance. So we will be seeking a contribution of £12,585 for this development. So we are recommended the application is approved, subject to the conditions outlined in the report. There is one condition that we would like to add, which would relate to permitted development rights being removed for fences in the future, so that we maintain that hedge line along that rural lane. So we would propose that condition as well, but we are recommending approval.
Thank you very much, Craig. I believe we have a couple of speakers this afternoon. Councillor Down, please. Welcome, Councillor Down, and you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm here representing Bath Community Council this afternoon. And may I first of all thank those members who were able to attend the site meeting yesterday. Those who were there will have seen that this is a very narrow lane, and whilst additional traffic which may be generated by this development would not be great, there would be additional traffic. I have never had the pleasure of having to walk down that lane with a buggy, but I have walked down it with a dog, and you really do, with this traffic coming up the hill, you really do have to stand very hard into the side of the lane for traffic to pass. It seemed to me that any additional traffic would conflict with any sort of active travel plan which the authority may have. Whilst it's true that there is no defined building line along the road, this property will be very much closer to the lane than any other property in the lane, and since it is also on a higher level than the lane, it will be somewhat dominating. Next, access to the property will require a very tight turn through the entrance, and particularly for larger vehicles, I'm not sure that it would be possible to get in solely in a forward gear. I think there would be a requirement for some manoeuvre. Finally, whilst the diagrams you were shown of the street scene dealt with properties to the north, there was nothing there that dealt with properties to the south in Orchid Meadow. This is sloping ground, so the property will be on a higher level than those below it in Orchid Meadow, sorry, and therefore must be overbearing to the properties there. I understand there was some discussion yesterday about the possibility of imposing a minimum height on the hedge line, but that's extraordinarily difficult to enforce, as you will know. Madam Chairman, this is a very large site. Indeed, the site plan does not show the full extent of the land within the property. There is further land which is excluded from the plan to the northwest, quite a large paddock, and it would be a simple matter, I think, to locate the property elsewhere within the site. So for those reasons, Chairman, I would ask the committee to reject this application.
Thank you, Councillor Down. I believe we may have another speaker this afternoon. Please state your name, and you have 4 minutes also. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Richard Collins. I live at 21 Orchid Meadow, one of the neighbouring properties that has objected to this submission. I'm speaking on behalf of all of the people in Orchid Meadow who put in objections to the proposal. We have read and considered the officer's report to the committee, and we do not obviously accept the conclusions. We refute the claim in para 6.4.1 of the report that most of the comments made by the community council and local residents have been addressed. And we firmly stand by our objections to the application, both from the residents of Orchid Meadow and the community council, who you just heard from, which are now on the record for his committee to consider. We'd like to make the following points about this application. Firstly, Trefcarn has been mentioned a few times. The history of the development of Trefcarn is important in this case. The house was erected with no planning permission originally, and the building height exceeded the height of the house it replaced. Permission was granted after the fact, and those of us in neighbouring properties, and we were living there at the time, were not given a chance to object to the raised roof line and the overlooking windows that now exist. We therefore believe this is an unwelcome precedent to be using this height and this building to set the height of the new building proposed for this plot. Paragraph 6.1.2 says that there is sufficient space to accommodate a detached dwelling and amenity space on the site. We again disagree. It is correct technically, but the report acknowledges that the site and the dwelling, the plot, is smaller than those surrounding. Also, 30% of the site would be needed for vehicle circulation, and a proposed two-storey development, I'm not sure why we're saying it's a bungalow, there are 2 stories involved here, would be close to the original house and to the site frontage and neighbouring boundaries. This congested development will be out of keeping totally with the established context of Orchid Meadow and Chapel Lane, as we've just heard. The report says that the development will add to a sense of place. It does the opposite. We therefore maintain the proposal does not comply with the policy DES1 of the LDP. Paragraph 6.1.3 report says that the properties to the south of the development are at a slightly lower level than the new plot. And we are therefore dismissing our concerns with the loss of privacy. In fact, the difference in level is significant, as you will have seen yesterday in the site visit to our property. Because of the slope, the properties on the line of sight from the new development to the houses below would be highly intrusive, and our bedrooms and bathrooms at the rear of our houses would be overlooked significantly. The applicant has, we acknowledge, gone some way to accommodate this by taking away the first floor window from the plans, but even so, visual intrusion will carry on from the ground floor patio areas, and the mature hedgeline, so-called, is not sufficient to alleviate the impact. We assure the committee that this development will have an impact on our privacy, amenity and health of the occupiers in Orchid Meadow, contrary to the policy EP1 of the LDP. And finally, I want to conclude by drawing attention to an earlier application, which mentioned a minute ago at Broadwinds, adjoining Trafalgar and further up Chapel Lane. The application in 2009 was dealt with by the same planning officer as in this case, and it was refused on the grounds that the building would compromise privacy, again, would dominate adjacent buildings, and would set a precedent. The exact reasons given were the replacement dwelling, by virtue of its large scale and bulk and form, would not respect the setting and would be out of keeping with the character of the street scene. The proposal was therefore out of keeping with the objectives of Part C of the DES1. Secondly, it was said the scale of the development so close to the common boundary would have an adverse impact on the amenity of the adjoining properties, and therefore contrary to DES1. The same reasons apply here, and therefore we believe the same reasons should be applying to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. I believe Councillor Davis had your hand first of all. Thank you.
The access seems pretty good to me. I really don't have an issue with this application. It's very nice to see that there's a 106 contribution there, albeit it is slightly less than what's on the application forms. But yes, I think the officers have gone through it complies with all the relevant rules, and therefore I would move approval of the application. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. I believe there is a letter to be read out.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Councillor Louise Brown had sent an email through that she asked to be read out in her absence. She couldn't be here today. So I believe Councillor Dovey was happy to read that one for us.
You comfortable with that, Councillor
Madam
Dovey?
Chair, is this going to be a norm now? If members are not here, they're going to send letters in. We've had this in later.
We will address it after we've heard this letter today, Councillor Evans. Thank you. Councillor Dovey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I hope you will understand that Councillor Brown's way of speaking and whatnot is not the same as mine, so they might have a stutter or something along the way. She sends her apologies. The letter begins. The application has generated both neighbourhood and community council strong objections due to it being an overdevelopment of the site, loss of the character of Chapel Lane, with neighbourhood privacy concerns. The character of Chapel Lane neighbouring properties in this area are distinctive in terms of being based on single dwellings in good-sized plots adjoining a narrow one-way country lane opposite the Mathern Conservation Area. The additional two-storey dwellings set forward and close to the road in the front garden of the existing property will totally change and be detrimental to the character of the area and neighbouring properties, and also will be determined to be detrimental to the visual amenity and the character of the existing dwelling. It is important to note that the land slopes upwards so that the proposed new dwelling, even though only 2 stories, will have a much greater impact on the privacy, visual and residential amenity of the properties lower down in Orchard Meadow, due to the land being much higher. It means that quoting heights of the proposed dwelling and the distances from the neighbourhood properties is irrelevant to the overbearing nature of the proposed dwelling due to the height of land differentials. The planning report states that there is not a common building line, but it is clear from the layout plan that there is a common building line and the neighbouring properties of Chapel Lane, each with their own frontage. In terms of planning policy, the proposed development is contrary to both planning policies EP1 and DES1, which can be found at the front on page 6 of this electronic version of this agenda. The major importance of this particular planning policy is illustrated by the fact that they are headed as the main context. EP1 on amenity states, development including proposals for new buildings and advertisements should have regard to the privacy, amenity, and health of occupiers of neighbouring properties. In this case, this application does not have regard to the privacy of occupiers of neighbouring properties lower down in Orchard Meadow. DS1 on general design consideration says, all development should be of a high quality, substantial design and respect the local character and distinctiveness of Monmouthshire's historic and natural environment. Development proposals will be required to, and the numbering here has gone a bit wrong, but I think, but I'll go with it anyway. Development proposals will be required to B, contribute to sense of place whilst ensuring that the amount of development and its intensity is compatible with existing uses. C, respect existing form, scale and siting, massing, materials, and the layout of its setting and neighbouring quality buildings. D, maintain reasonable levels of privacy and amenity of occupiers of neighbouring properties where applicable. And I, ensure that existing residential areas characterized by high levels of privacy and spaciousness are protected from overdevelopment and insensitive or inappropriate use. There is, for anybody who wants it, there is a reference here to Monmouthshire website, and I guess this is relevant to the planning application, obviously. The layout of the properties on the neighbouring Chapel Lane are characterised by high levels of privacy and spaciousness, in relation to their layout, settings, and neighbouring building on Chapel Lane and privacy levels, all being single dwelling plots with frontages. Whereas, in contrast, the proposed dwelling will result in 2 dwellings on 1 plot, with the additional dwelling in the front garden of the existing property. It would result in overdevelopment of the plot, impact on privacy, and be completely out of character and detrimental to its neighbourhood and setting. The planning report agrees in paragraph 612 that whilst there is a mixture of house types along the Chapel Lane, the prevailing character is one of modern dwellings occupying substantial plots. I did that because it's italicized here. It is also the neighbouring property's prevailing character that these substantial plots are for 1 dwelling only. In summary, in view of the strong objections from occupiers of neighbouring properties, and it being contrary to the main planning policy context, particularly but not only ensuring that existing residential areas are characterized by high levels of privacy and spaciousness, are protected from overdevelopment and insensitive and inappropriate infilling. I would be grateful if the committee would support refusing this application on the grounds of policy EP1 and DES1, brackets, paragraphs B, C, D, and L, close brackets.
Thank you, Councillor Dovey. Anybody wish to comment on that, Mark or Phil or anybody, since the letter was read out?
Not from me, Madam Chair. Craig?
No, the officer's recommendation is clearly outlined in the report. Obviously, we consider the development to be in accordance with DES1 and EP1, and the site is sufficient enough to take this development. We don't think there is a definitive character and appearance in the area, and obviously for the reasons outlined in the policy rationale, planning policy rationale outlined in the report, we think this should be supported.
Thank you, Craig. Councillor Dovey, please. Thank you. I think due to that very long, detailed letter, it has been questioned whether if a member of the committee is absent and needs to have something read out. We do all receive things with modern technology today in late correspondence, this sort of thing, so we have at least pre-knowledge of what was in the letter. So I think the committee is minded to think that whether we should have it read out in the committee if we've all had sight of it, but we must note that it has been read out today by request of the local member. So is there any comment on that letter being read out?
Yes, Madam Chair. If this is going to be the normal practice, we might as well all stop home and send letters in. And
I think that was going to be quite extreme,
well,
Councillor.
you know, what I'm trying to say is, Madam Chair, this is ridiculous. Because I know there's another letter in from the same member on another application, right? And are we going on? You've just allowed more than 4 minutes for that to be read out.
As a member of the committee, you do get 10 minutes, if so, to speak. But I understand where you're coming from, and you don't also, as a member, you interact with what other people says as well, which obviously Councillor Brown can't do that today, which I do think is very important, that as a committee, you're here in presence and hopefully to see the site visit so you can take on board all that is said and observed when you have a site visit. That's so do we have a view that we take it as not being read out in the committee or very much summarised, or that we receive it all as late correspondence or as an email? Councillor Feakin.
For me, Chair, just in my own personal opinion, I'd be quite happy to accept that if every member of the committee has received it ahead of the committee, and that we've all had the opportunity to read it and digest its content. If there was anything in particular that we needed to ask in response to that email or whatever correspondence coming in, it would give us the opportunity to ask that question in committee. But I don't feel the need is, you know, for me, I think we're burning time if we're not careful, if we're having to read out letter after letter after letter. For, you know, we're all we're all precious on time.
Councillor Figan. Councillor Murphy, please, then Councillor Powell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think we should receive it electronically and deal with it that way. The only point I would make is that perhaps if there are specific points that are raised in the letter, that in presenting the application, officers can deal with those particular points so that at least there's some sort of interaction with the letter. And that I would have thought was perfectly acceptable. I have got a couple of points on the application when you come back to it.
Thank you. Councillor Powell, this is just about the letter now I'm
Yes.
dealing with.
Yes, I feel that if she'd been here, some of the points she made may have been come up in debate, wherefore she would think about it differently. This is what it's about, us debating our ideas, what we think and what we've been given to look at. And if you've got just a letter like that, there's no response, and she can't answer questions we wanted to ask them of her. And I feel that we should just read it as late correspondence, and that's it.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Councillor Roger Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I've just lost 4 minutes of my life, basically, because I've got the report in front of me and I was following through every word that was being said there. I really don't understand why we had to have this read out. We've all got it, and if we wanted to take any notice of it, we could have done, and we don't have to, but that's a bit controversial there, saying that maybe. I don't want to waste any more of my life having something printed in front of me and being read out that I'm perfectly capable of reading myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if there are any items of concern, we in the committee can always ask for clarity from the officers in attendance. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the points here are that all of the items that have been raised, the officers have answered those queries because they are actually within the document if it's read properly. If there was an item of which there was a query, then as Councillor Murphy has says, the officers can address that under the heading of other correspondence and give us an answer there. But we're asking the officers to answer questions when they've actually given us the information and those policies are being adhered to. So why are we querying them? You know.
Thank you for that clarity, Councillor. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Just say, excuse me, from an officer point of view, hearing your message loud and clear, Councillor Brown had explicitly asked that it was read out on the basis we've done that for other absent members in the past, which is true, we have. So it's helpful to understand how you'd like to proceed from here on in, if the email's received in time and in late correspondence, which these two were. So we'll note that, taking that forward. Thanks.
Yes, I think, when I was first on planning committee, we didn't even have a computer. So yes, you benefited on. Well, we didn't get emails, we didn't get anything like that. And if there's any query, once you've read the report, you can always get clarity yourself or raise it in the committee. So do I get an understanding from you, Councillor David Evans, that you do not wish for letters to be read out like this in future planning committees?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Do you have a seconder for that? Councillor Davis. So thank you very much, but we have addressed, as requested by Councillor Louise Brown, that it be read out. So now we can continue now with the application itself. Councillor Murphy to start then, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I thought long and hard about this when we were on the site yesterday. And I went through a period of thinking that it was all right. But the more I think about it, the more I am concerned about it breaking that building line. It would be very dominant in that particular area. It absolutely, well, it ruins the site, but that isn't an issue for us. That's more the issue for the owner. Councillor Down referred to a paddock at the back. I take it that's that square. There's a spare bit there, isn't there? Yeah. It didn't take too much working out, but I thought I'd better just check that. There is one request I've got that should this be approved, I was very concerned about the gravel that abuts the highway. If you go to that slide that shows the Land Rover Land Rover Discovery there you are, that one. Surely there should be 5 metres or whatever the regulation is of tarmac there. We shouldn't have gravel going straight onto a lane like that. It's particularly dangerous with cyclists, which we seem to be seeing an awful lot more of these days. So as I say, should it receive permission, I'd like it conditioned that is remedied, because it's definitely not right.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy, and I think that should be pointed out in all sort of developments that where the driveways go onto a main road, because it can be very dangerous. I thought it was, a requirement that was taken as said. Councillor Dovey now, please.
I'm sorry, got a sticking one. Got it. 2 points, Madam Chairman. I guess perhaps it was a longish email, and perhaps it wasn't helped by the rate at which I read it, but it came to me with its content pretty green, and so I hadn't got any sort of rhythm, so I tried to make it as definitive as I could. The other thing that is in my mind, and would have helped, I think, if we'd have driven on up with the bus yesterday up towards the top of the development, up towards the chapel. And you can see what has happened with overdevelopment in there, that there are some very nice houses, but they're absolutely crammed in, and the design is compromised just to get them in, and it isn't very good. And the reason I raise that point particularly is because the paddock is not indicated in this application, and that does worry me as to, if this one goes in here, then we will have another overdevelopment, or possibly another overdevelopment of that part of the overall area, which I think would be a great pity. So those are my reservations.
Thank you, Councillor Dovey. Councillor Roger Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can we go to the plan with the right? Thank you. I wasn't at the site meeting yesterday, which seems unfortunate. There's obviously a lot to this site that it almost makes it essential that I was there, and therefore on deliberations I'll be abstaining. But from what I see of that, I don't particularly like this. Is far and away out of character than most of the subdivided plots that I've ever seen in the county. I think there's no doubt about that, and comparing it with what's alongside. So, as I say, I wasn't at the site visit, but I'd be a bit worried about this one if I had been there. And as I say, just to reiterate, I'll be abstaining on this, but I'm not too happy about it.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Matthew Feakin.
Thank you, Chair. And this is a bit to do with the yardstick which we're measuring these with, because in some towns we're saying it's fine, and other towns we're saying it's not fine, and sometimes we've granted permissions which are tighter than this, and there's other applications which come forward and we've said there isn't enough space. So it is about understanding that yardstick which we're measuring them by. But with this application that's before us at the moment, given that it's been granted, given the officer's recommendation, I'm struggling to see why we should refuse it. We have an enabling policy. I don't see on what grounds we could refuse it. If we're willing to condition hedgerow heights and those sorts of things. So my dilemma is I don't know on what grounds we would refuse it, given the other sites that we have permitted in similar circumstances.
Thank you, Councillor Feakin. Craig, you wish to elaborate, please?
Yeah, I just thought I'd like to come in there in terms of some of the points that are being raised, particularly with regards to the paddock at the top. So if you look at that area of land, it's actually outside of this application. Yeah, it's not before planning committees at this moment today. So we're just looking at what the application is, so that the application for this dwelling in the front garden. So yes, it is a part of the land ownership, but it's not part of this application, so we shouldn't be discussing that today. We should be looking at the merits of this planning application. There was also a point raised with regards to the highways and the implication of the gravel driveway. That is a note to applicants as part of the highways section 184 when they need to engage with the Highways Act, but certainly as part of the red line for this development we can condition that 5 metres back, and we could have positive communication with the existing driveway in terms of this development, but in terms of we're limited on the existing arrangement, but certainly we can have positive communication with the existing applicant on that. There was also a question mark with regards to the levels and the fact that this is slightly raised above Chapel Lane. As I said in the presentation, if we go back to the street scene plan, which is further down, I think, Phil, this, you can see here that the finished floor level is 100, which is exactly the same as the existing dwelling. So in terms of the hierarchy of the roads, and I think this is a good plan to show you the impact the development will have in terms of overdevelopment. You can see that there's a clear hierarchy. So you've got Broadlands, you've got the existing property, and then the proposed new dwelling. I appreciate what members are saying in terms of it is a balanced judgment of whether this is an overdevelopment of the site. I think if you look at the site plan and this elevation, you get an indication of how this development will fit. And as I've outlined, it is a balanced judgment, but we have looked at our policy, we've looked at DES1, looked at EP1, and we do feel that this is a sufficient plot to accommodate this development. And looking from Chapel Lane, it wouldn't be overpowering, it wouldn't be an overdevelopment. So for the rationale that we've outlined in our report, we are clear that this is the correct recommendation, and it's obviously for members now as the decision makers to make that balanced judgment.
I know perhaps it's a little bit differently, but we've had Councillor Down and we've had an objector speak. Obviously, the rest of you didn't notice, but the owner at the back raised her hand. So as she has addressed the committee, is there anything you'd like to give clarity on that? So it is not in your ownership, so that could be discounted completely from this. And we shouldn't be considering it anyway, because that is not what's in front of us today anyway. So, Councillor Davis.
Just to remind you, Madam Chairman, I moved approval some time ago.
We are certainly getting on with the job, I think, Councillor Davis. Councillor David Evans.
And I'll second the proposal.
Show of hands for... it's been nominated for approval and seconded for approval by Councillor Davis and Councillor David Evans. Could I have a show of hands for approval, please? Those against? 3. And I believe Councillor Harris, you abstained, and Councillor Webb also abstained. They weren't there at the site visit yesterday. Right, thank you.
Madam Chairman, is it approved then?
Yes, it has been approved, thank you.
Madam Chairman, I'm sorry, but I do have to leave now. Will somebody else read out these notes from Councillor Brown, or are we going to agree not to read them out, bearing in mind what's been discussed? I'm sorry?
What letter she got now? That was from the 62, was it?
Yeah, Madam Chair, there's...
That was the one on Latimer Farm? Yes, yeah. As you will be leaving the chamber, I'll ask the planning officer if you will kindly make out the key points to that application.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah. Hey, Roger.
Right, thank you, members. Thank you. We will now go on to page 41, 01064, and this is the workshop for Warehouse Lentilio Cresceni. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a full application for the change of use of a workshop to a venue for filming and residential cookery school with 5 bedrooms of holiday accommodation above. And the site is within the village of Lantilio Cresceni. It's also worth noting that the application is presented to you today, members, as a result of an objection from us Highways as a statutory consultee. So for any members that weren't there yesterday, we'll just run through the photographs. This is the building in question. You can also see the existing site entrance there in the foreground. This is a view just outside the site looking back towards the village. That's a closer view of the building. And that's just showing the extent of the site in the context of the village. It's that, thank you, Phil. It's that building there. So the main dwelling, warehouse, is Grade 2 listed. It's also within the Lentilio Cresceni Conservation Area and also Lentilio Court Registered Park and Garden. The site is also partially in Flood Zone C2, and we've got an extent of that, Phil. So you can see that's the building there. So there's small elements of the building within that, that boundary. As I said earlier, the existing vehicle access would be retained with informal parking positioned around the building. So if you just go on to the elevations file. So 2 extensions are proposed with a 2-storey addition to the northeast and a single-storey lobby to the southwest. The building would be reclad to match the extension, and this would include timber cladding and standing metal seam cladding, with new steel sheets replacing the existing cement profile sheets to the roof. So, with regard to our detailed considerations, the site is within the village of Lantilio Cresceni, and therefore not considered in the open countryside, and any policies in respect of open countryside would not apply. Policy E3 does provide some support for home working to allow small businesses to operate, provided there is no adverse impact on local immunity and or the character of the area. In addition, Strategic Policy S11 provides support in principle for tourism and its benefit to the rural economy. As I stated earlier, the site is sensitively located within the grounds of a listed building, a conservation area and a registered historic park and garden. The existing building, as you've seen, if you were there yesterday and seen on the photographs, is of sort of utilitarian appearance, and it's considered that the sensitive extensions and recladding the main building would actually enhance the conservation area in line with policy HE1 of the LDP. In addition, also note that you'll see in the officer's report that no objection has been received from the council's heritage officer with regard to any impact on the Grade 2 listed dwelling. An objection from the council's highway engineer has been received, and that's, as I said earlier, the reason why it's before you today. Their concerns relate to the suitability of the existing access and the information provided on the levels of occupancy of the intended uses. Highways engineers have requested a 45-degree ease of access display be provided. However, officers of the view that given the sensitive historic setting and the low frequency and speeds of vehicles in the locality, it's not considered that such an engineered solution would be appropriate or justified. The proposed layout shows parking for 5 vehicles and further informal parking could be provided within the site, and it's therefore considered at officer level that the site provides acceptable parking and turning provision for the proposed use and would not cause unacceptable harm to highway safety. As we saw on the map earlier, the site is partially located within Flood Zone C2, and members are well aware of the requirements of National Policy TAN 15 that highly vulnerable accommodation should not be allowed. However, in this instance, the accommodation is all at first floor level and with safe access and egress outside of the flood area. A flood consequence assessment has been submitted that confirms that the depth of the 100-year flood event would actually be 120 mil lower than the existing floor level. NRW have been consulted and raised no objection, and therefore the proposal is considered acceptable with regard to flooding. The Council's Environmental Health Officer has also been consulted in respect of ground contamination issues based on previous land uses, and as you'll see in the officer's report, a detailed condition is required that would manage any issues that would be revealed. Similarly, The tree officer has requested a condition to safeguard mature trees on the site during construction works, which are protected through its conservation area status. Therefore, subject to these and the other conditions in the officer's report, it's presented you today with a recommendation to approve.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, a lot of us were there yesterday. As it's in my ward, I'll leave my comments till after you've all given yours. Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The existing building is an absolute eyesore against the beautiful Grade 2 listed building. It fits well into the site. I think the proposal's absolutely first class, and I'm quite happy to recommend approval.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Anybody else wish to comment? Councillor Powell, then Councillor David Evans.
Right. I'd just like to second the approval because I think it'll be an ideal event there anyway, and a good idea.
Thank you. Councillor David Evans.
I think Maureen I was going to second it, but yes, there is plenty of room there, and it would make a big impact, not for improving the property, but for business as well.
Yes, I think it was Highways that gave the main concerns, but as you saw in the first slide, could you put the first slide up there, please? There's a double gate there that they can use that. There are two entrances, so I don't think, considering it used to be a garage, so obviously there was comings and goings on that site. A lot of buildings in the countryside are timber clad, what we call Yorkshire boarding, and also I think it gives a good help to sort of something in the countryside. You've got a local pub there, which at the Hogshead Head, that people can go to in the evening or whatever if there's anybody there as residents for the cookery courses. So I think it's only a big plus for Lintilliw-Cresceni, which is very rural indeed. So I myself am very pleased with the application. But Councillor Murphy, I believe, proposed approval and seconded. Excuse me, my Councillor Powell, but I believe Councillor Dovey, did you wish to comment before I take the vote?
Only to say, Madam Chairman, you covered some of the points, but we went through a planning application on the other side of the road, and that didn't go anywhere. I'm just saying that that didn't fail for want of it.
No, that was further along on the main road on the B4233, which is different altogether. We're dealing with this application in front of us today, so I'd like to have a show of hands now for approval, please. Right, thank you all very much indeed. We now go to page 61, and this in the Coach and Horses Inn in Caerwent is 00413. Craig, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, this application is a retrospective planning application for existing garden play equipment at the Coach and Horses Inn in Caerwent. The site is located in a central location within the village and positioned on the easternmost edge of the Caerwent Roman city, which is designated as a scheduled ancient monument. The existing city walls from the easternmost boundary of the premises adjacent to the Category C highway. So that you can see that the Roman walls are all along the eastern boundary and running along, if Phil's pointing out there, along the road. So this application is a retrospective planning application. It is for play equipment on the site. You can see it from the aerial photographs here. You can see that the sighting of all the different play equipment. Phil, if you'd like to go through the photographs. Oh, this is a plan showing the sighting of the play equipment on the site. The circle in blue, that's play equipment, which is a painted climbing frame and a large fiberglass red dragon, has been sited there for many years and is immune from planning consent, from needing any planning consent because it's lawful given the amount of time it's been there for. This application is dealing with everything within that red circle. So all of that stuff in the red circle requires planning consent, which is a climbing frame, some seesaws, a castle, etc., etc. So if you'd like to go through the So from this photograph is from the adjacent highway on the eastern side of the site. You can see here the climbing frame and some of the other fiberglass images on the side. Let's keep going through. Again, you can see here this is the visual impact of the proposed development from the road. And obviously members were on site yesterday where they seen it. Again, this is another image of the play equipment. And more images. So the application is before members. As I said, it's considered the development is operational development given the level of permanency on the site. So the planning consent is required for this type of development. As you can see in the report, Carwent Community Council have recommended support for the application. This is a historic area, so the visual impact of this development is a material planning consideration when looking at this. Cadw have reviewed the development, and Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust. As outlined in the report, Cadw were mindful that the equipment is relatively temporary in nature and can be taken away at a later date. Therefore, it doesn't have a long-term impact on the scheduled ancient monument. So Cadw's comments are there for you to consider. In terms of neighbour notification, as outlined in the report, there's been a significant amount of representations received on the planning application, some 626 letters. There are 7 letters of objection, which are concerned with the amount of noise and litter and pollution that this development generates in the area, as well as the play equipment being out of character and harming the historic environment. As outlined in the report, planning officers considered that this play equipment is auxiliary and incidental to the existing business and supports that business. So there is planning policy in support within the local development plan in terms of S8 and S10 in supporting businesses and supporting the local economy. So this equipment does actually attract footfall and attract families to that area, obviously who engage in the local business and help support the coach and horses in. In terms of the development and the impact on noise in the area, the existing Roman walls is acting as a bit of a noise abatement to the properties to the east. So that is helping, according to the Environmental Health Officer, the impact on noise. But it is recognised that there might be some potential noise to the western boundary. Phil, if you go back to the location plan, there could be some noise going westwards to this property to the west of the Coach and Horses Inn. Therefore, the applicant has suggested erecting a fence, a 2-metre fence, to help shield and screen some of that noise going acrosswards, and that would be a condition of the development if members were minded to approve the development. So on balance, as outlined in the report, we do feel this play equipment is auxiliary and incidental to the Coach and Horses Inn. On balance, we don't feel that it does have a significantly detrimental impact on the historic environment. It could be moved at a later date, and therefore, we don't think the visual impact of the play equipment is unacceptable. Therefore, for the reasons outlined in the report, we are recommending this application is approved, subject to the conditions outlined in the report in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Who's the local member? Councillor Murphy first, then, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This application is really to support a local business that is the only one for miles around that actually is catering for families. There are local pubs in the area, but they certainly don't have the facilities that are conducive to families going to them. Any particular noise that might come out of this site is going to be very sporadic indeed. It's certainly not going to be a major problem, I'm sure. And as I say, this is by way of supporting people who are trying very, very hard to make sure that this business survives. So I definitely support it and would recommend approval.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Jim Higginson, then Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I support what Councillor Murphy said. Yeah, I mean, country pubs, which is what it is, they need this type of equipment to draw families to support the business, and if I put it that way, and I don't have any problem with it at all. In fact, I think it enhances the facility that is within the Cowent area, and I'm pleased to second it.
Thank you, Councillor Higgins. And Councillor Alan Davis.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I thought Councillor Clark made a very good point yesterday that whilst I'm very supportive of local business, and I support this application, by the way, I think we really need to be aware that there is quite a lot of equipment on that site now, much more than there was previously. And I think the applicant needs to be told that planning permission is required for, if there's any proposal to put any more on that site. I think there's quite enough there now. It doesn't need to be any more. And we need to make sure that things don't turn up there that shouldn't be there, I think. And I think Councillor Clark was exactly right. I was quite surprised to see how much equipment there was there, actually. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. And I think because of all the chairs and benches or whatever were there, did make it look perhaps a bit crowded then. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think the Romans might have been impressed if they'd known this was going to happen. I wasn't at the site visit, but I know the site and I've been there quite a few times. And what impressed me more than anything else was the response from Cadw, who seemed eminently sensible in this case. They don't particularly like some of the stuff, but they know it's going to wear out, and they'll have a jolly good input by the sounds of it when it comes around to anything else that's going to go there. So I've got no problems in sticking my hand up for approval as well.
Right, thank you. I think in some respects it's a joy to know that the children are outside, because a lot of them stay inside on their gadgets, and obviously it won't be every day of the week or right throughout the year. It'll have highs and lows. So yes, I fully support it as well. Anybody else now wish to comment? Sorry, Craig?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's just to outline in terms of the impact on the historic environment, that this proposed development in terms of the visual impact does preserve the Roman walls. I mean, as you've seen yesterday, as members who were on site, we drove down that highway. As members said, the wall is still a prominent, dominant part of that area. So in terms of the tests of assessing development against the historic environment, the conservation area, we do feel that the conservation area is preserved as part of this development. And as Cadw have outlined, they haven't objected to the development, and it is relatively temporary, so it could be taken away at a later date. So the historic environment is preserved as part of this development, for this proposal.
Thank you for that, Craig. Councillor Powell?
Yes, I agree with what everybody else has said. And one of the things is this: if we didn't have that equipment there and the children were just running about in the grass, they would be very tempted to climb on the Roman wall. And I've seen myself at Abergavenny Castle in places where there's plenty of signs saying don't climb on the walls, but I've seen teenagers and youngsters climbing them, and you can see where it has actually broken some bit off. So at least with the play equipment there, they're not going to be tempted to scramble onto the wall.
Yes, and also with the tables and benches there, the parents themselves are able to sit and supervise the children anyway, which is very, very important. So it's been moved, I believe, by Councillor Murphy for approval, and seconded, I believe, by Councillor Higginson. Show of hands for approval, please. That's unanimous. Thank you all very much. We now go to page 73 to 80. This is 00548 Latimer Farm.
Thank you, Chair.
And I believe we have some comments to be read out, observed by Councillor Brown, again, the local member. You're going to do that, please, then, Mark or Phil?
I'll present then, shall I?
They'll have the presentation,
actually, some of the
we'll
points
have
I'm
the
going to
letter.
make do address what the local member has raised.
Right.
So,
I'll leave that
hopefully-
with you then, Phil. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So this application is 00548 Latimer Farm, Earlswood. It's for the retention of the use of that building there on the right as a stable to house up to 16 horses. And then, so that's part the retrospective part of the application. Then there's also an unimplemented element of the application, which is to form a manege and that is to be done to the north, the other side, to the left of the building there. So the proposal is for an existing agricultural shed that's been built around 2015-16 and was used for agricultural purposes. That's to be used to stable up to 16 horses in a do-it-yourself livery business, in effect. So people rent the space, but they go and tend and look after the animals accommodated there themselves, so they don't expect somebody to do it for them. So some of the horses are the applicants who used to farm the land and lives in Latimer Farm itself. So the elements of the scheme not yet implemented, or the element of the scheme not yet implemented, is a provision of a manege nearer the road, i.e. north of the building there, and a storage area for the manure. And that would be just to the right and to the rear of that building there. It's quite discreet, as we saw on site yesterday. It's not like the manure pile, which is at Ridge House Stables on the other side of the road, which is in the middle of a really open field, quite prominent once you were able to view it, and prominent certainly to the neighbour who had issues with that originally, which is why this case has been raised as an issue by the local community. So, noting the local members' concerns about the implications of the waste heap on land near this site, she does raise questions about the proximity of nearby dwellings. So we have measured that. The nearest dwellings, other than the applicants, are a property called Mount Pleasant to the south. I'll just have a look through those. Sorry, that's where the manege is going to go, that area there. And that's the access that we drove up yesterday in the minibus onto the main road. And that's showing it in context then. So the two properties, and usefully, they're actually just on this slide. So the first one is Mount Pleasant, right down into the south there. The waste heap's going in here. So that is the distance from the spoil heap would be 140 metres from the spoil heap to the actual curtilage of that dwelling, and then 160 metres to the dwelling itself. And then the other one, the nearest property, is Trem Havren on the other side of the road and uphill from the spoil heap. And that's 125 metres to the curtilage and 140 to the actual dwelling. So in that instance, we feel those distances are sufficient to protect the amenity of those two properties. The proposal is considered to be an appropriate use of rural land, and it wouldn't generate so much traffic that would be harmful to highway safety or local amenity. And indeed, that road is quite well used. As we all know, we travel it regularly on our site visits and general business, so it is one of the busier sort of rural class 3 type roads. The rider manege would measure 60 by 20, and we've got a more detailed plan of it. So it would be in this area here, and it would be surfaced in a mix of sand with a mix of sand and fibre, which is standard practice for this type of equine facility. And there are many examples of these throughout the county. Around the manege would be a low post and rail fence, which is appropriate in this rural setting, and a hedge of indigenous deciduous trees, including birch, beech and rowan, would be planted between the road and the manege. This new hedge would not only help to visually screen the manege when viewed from the road, it would also replace a leylandii hedge which looks out of place in this rural setting. And a riding manege is in keeping with the character of this landscape, and the development would be in accordance with LDP policy LC5. As regards the spoil heap, it's been considered by the Council's Environmental Health Officer and NRW, who have no objection to its location. The waste would be spread on or off the land on an occasional basis, and its provision would be secured by a condition as set out in the report. The nearest private water source is over 350 metres from the proposed spoil heap, which is well in excess of the 50-metre margin required by DEFRA. No lighting is proposed for the manege, and this would also be controlled by condition. The suggested operating hours, again raised by the local member, are between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. The local member suggested a later starting time of 7 a.m. to protect local amenity, and also for times to be adjusted for winter months. And while this is noted, it's suggested that in a rural location where the agricultural community will commence work early, then 6 a.m. is not an unreasonable time for this business to operate. And the business operating hours will regulate themselves in winter and be shorter, as necessary. So we would recommend approval of the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Now we have the letter. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to be clear, did you want a summary or the whole thing?
I think it's unanimous that we have a summary. Thank you, Phil.
Okay, thanks. It is the exact correspondence in your late correspondence bundle anyway.
I say that we've already had a copy of it anyway,
Yeah.
so there's no need.
So, three main issues. Firstly, siting of the manure heap. Secondly, landscaping, and thirdly, operation hours. In terms of siting of the manure heap, Councillor Brown is seeking clarification of its actual distance, which Phil has presented on. So I think if I heard him right, it's 125 metres from the nearest curtilage, 140 from the nearest dwelling, 140 from the curtilage of another dwelling, 160 beyond. Councillor Brown goes on to refer to the recent appeal situation just over the road, which members will all be familiar with, and how we were to and fro with that, and mentions the fact that the distance in that case of 124 metres was considered sufficient. I would comment that that appeal decision doesn't say 124 metres is the requirement. It just says in that case it was sufficient. So 123 metres is not therefore unacceptable. But anyway, so yeah, she comments or questions the distance of the manure pile, screening, its distance from a watercourse, which I believe Phil covered in the presentation as well. And also has made comments based on information from Horse and Hound and Surrey County Council about the amount of manure that that horses may produce in a year, 16 horses. But again, I think when members are discussing it on site, we were talking about the fact it wouldn't all be stored there. Some would be taken off site for spreading as well as spread on site as a usual fashion. Landscaping, sorry, I'm muddling up. Confirming Councillor Brown's points and my own views. So Councillor Brown was querying the position of the manure heap, its extent given the waste produced by horses, screening, distance from a watercourse. In terms of landscaping, Councillor Brown's asked that we check on the siting of suitable landscaping in relation to removing visibility of manure heap / store from the landscape and from residential properties. And in terms of operation hours, she asks that committee considers whether they feel the operation hours are suitable. It's currently listed as 6 a.m. till 9 p.m. Councillor Brown comments that will generate extra traffic in a quiet country area with up to 16 vehicles accessing and exiting the site at different times. Would 7 a.m. till 9 p.m. be more reasonable, or even shorter hours in the winter months when it gets darker? So those are those points. To separate out in terms of my comments, Phil's commented on the distance. As you'll know, you'll probably recall that the inspector in the site over the road did make a comment along the lines of, but relatively blunt, that the countryside does smell. It is a working environment. And I was also looking in that case of whether the pile of manure was visible and whether that was harmful or not. So those are the points before you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. It says up to 16 horses. There might only be 4 there some days or for a length of time. So it doesn't mean that there's constantly going to be horses of 16 stable there. Sometimes they could be out in the fields anyway because it's quite a large farm. So it's a little bit evasive on what the true picture would be. And also, different to the manure muck that we saw at the other one that has been raised today, that was out in the middle of a field. It is proposed always now, and Councillor Feakin will know as much about this as I would, I expect, that it has to be on a concrete base, so there's no seepage into the land, and it will be spread. So I think a lot of it has been cleared of the right queries that Councillor Brown had, but there might only be times when there's no horses in there, or 3 or 4 or whatever, but it's up to 16. So I would welcome any more comments, please. Councillor Feakin.
Thank you, Chair. And just as a point to note, really, for the committee, that horse manure smells a lot less than other manures. And this is an agricultural building that has been erected. If it was full of cattle, and on cleaning the cattle out at the end of the year, the smell from that would be a lot more stronger for the residents than horses. So there has to be a realisation that the countryside does smell, in my opinion, rather good.
And also, it is a lot more straw content when you're cleaning out horses. I know, to my detriment of being a dairy farmer, when they're cleaning out the slurry pitch, it is very strong, but it soon goes. Councillor Clark.
I'd like to know the source of the calculation. 150 tonnes is an awful lot of manure. That's 3 tonnes a week. Well, out of 16 horses, it's got to do some... Where's the calculation come from?
Well, that's if they're in every day, but if they're in the fields, I mean, I don't think anybody's going round and collecting and weighing. Councillor Higginson. Councillor Higginson.
Yeah, all I can say, you've got a herd of cows there, so what's going to be the difference?
That's a lot more.
Councillor Feakin.
I'd like to move officer's recommendation for approval, please.
Sorry, Madam Chair, just to clarify in terms of the calculation, I'm sure Councillor Brown confirm if she were present. There's a couple of references in her email. So there's a horseandhounds.co.uk article about potential muck heap fees from DEFRA, and I think the manure advice note from Surrey County Council is where the calculation of how much manure will be generated came from. So.
Councillor Powell.
Regards to the cars, I mean, many times there'll be 2 or 3 horses belonging to one person. I'm sure that not each horse doesn't have a car visiting it every day, so I think that's 16 cars is a little bit far-fetched.
Yes, and also people will be going there before they go to work if they're attending horses, so an early start is usually quite, I would say, quite common in the countryside. So Councillor Feakin has moved approval, a seconder for it, and seconded by Councillor Higginson. A show of hands for approval, please. Right, thank you. That's unanimous. Right, I shall now... the next one on the page is that page 91. That will be removed from that position to the end of the agenda. So we'll now go to page 101 to 110, and this is application 00879 and Bridge Street Ask. Usman Andrew, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just this application is to provide a pedestrian access between the main public car park in the centre of the town of Usk with the rear car park of the in-between pub. So this is where that centre of hedging there is where the access would go, and that would fill, if you show the next photograph. That's the view from the opposite side in the car park pub. So effectively it's providing a pedestrian link from one to the other, so it would be approximately 2.5 metres long by 2.25 metres wide. It'd be enclosed by a 2-metre close board fence. I see the application is only before members today, as it's partially owned by the council. There's been no objection raised from any third parties or indeed the council's highways department. There's no loss of parking spaces, and there's also no visual impact on the conservation area which the site is located within. So therefore, to keep it brief, subject to the analysis in the report and the conditions set out in the report, it's recommended to approve.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy?
I don't want to pour cold water on this because I'm quite happy with it, but as it's partially owned by the council, has asset management been asked if we're happy to part with that bit of land? You know, we're granting access over some of our land. I just wondered whether we should be taking account of that.
They have been served notice correctly as part of the application process, and that would be a sort of land disposal matter then for the estates team. So, but they have been correctly notified.
Yeah. So the actual planning permission, if it's granted now, wouldn't alter that anyway. That would be a matter for estates to deal with the applicant. Yeah, that's all right. It's clear. Just to clear that up.
Thank you. Been very diligent, I think, there, Councillor Murphy.
Well, it is part of my portfolio to get
Yes,
the money.
exactly. Councillor Feakin and then Councillor David Evans.
I'll be happy to move approval, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor David Evans.
You mentioned fencing. Fencing was mentioned there. What type of fencing?
Yes, thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. Just to confirm, it would be 2 metre high, close boarded fence. You'd have a section of the sort of shrubbery and overgrowth removed. Just to sort of correct myself, and it should be set out in the report, but as I say, the site is within the Usk conservation area, and our policy requires that any proposal should either preserve or enhance, and in this case, it's considered that this would at least preserve the character of the conservation area. So just wanted to confirm that in addition to the point about the fence.
Thank you, Andrew. David?
Can I get my... I'm prepared to second it then.
Thank you. Councillor Clark?
Yeah, subject to the discussion that Philip's had, that we must sort that out.
Chair, sorry, we couldn't grant planning permission subject to an asset management decision. We could make it, or you could make the decision on this in his own right, if the asset management committee or estate, whoever, decide not to part with the land. That's a separate decision for them.
But I gather, Mark, that it hasn't been to asset management. That's what's worrying me.
It's just a separate process, Madam Chair. They'd have to have both bits of consent to proceed. It seems in this case ours has just come first.
I'll take it up with them anyway. So don't let it get in the way of this, or deal with it separately.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Joe, you're happy with that? Yeah. Right, thank you. So it's been proposed and I believe seconded. Could I have a show of hands for approval, please? Right, that's carried. We now go to page 111 to page 116. This is 00929 on Bulwark Road, Chepstow, Bofferton House. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam
Anybody wish
Chair.
to comment?
I will keep it brief. This is application Bofferton House and Bulwark Road in Chepstow. The application is for the change of use of the building from a day centre. It's currently a council-owned property. That's why the application is being presented to members today. This is photographs of the building. So there's a previous education centre and a day centre. This application is a proposal to change the use of the building for one residential unit. So it's a one single unit. There is no physical alterations proposed for the building. So we're literally just looking at the use of the building. It is a Grade 2 listed building, and it does lie within Chepstow's conservation area, and Bofferton House is actually mentioned in the conservation area appraisal. But as I said, there's no physical changes to the building. Therefore, the proposal to change the use of it does preserve the conservation area. There are 2 letters of concern and objection to the proposed development. They're more speculative in terms of concerns over being multiple dwellings in the future, but at this stage we are just looking at it as one unit, one single residential unit for the site. So for the rationale outlined in the report, officers are recommending the application is approved. This is subject to the affordable housing contribution, which I emailed to all members earlier today. So the financial contribution, in line with the revised, now adopted SBG from last week, is £35,913.60. So we are recommending approval subject to signing legal agreement to gain that financial contribution and the conditions outlined in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Any comments?
Chairman.
Councillor Davis?
Would have been a higher contribution had it been you.
Anybody else wish to comment?
Yeah, can I move it, Chairman?
Councillor Higginson, no? When you go to press your button, I thought, no. Yeah, well, I think it could be a really beautiful residence there and very prominent. And we'll see if there's any applications in the future, but we're dealing with this in front of us now today. So you moved it, Councillor Clark, and seconded by Councillor Feakin. A show of hands for approval, please. Thank you. Oh gosh, yes. It seems to be a long afternoon somehow, or a lot of debating going on. Page 117, 01049, and this is Mill Street, Usk.
Thank you, Chair. This is a conversion of that building there, which is on the edge of the recreation area in Maryport Street. It's an existing store, and then on the other side of the furthest part of the building is used as a sort of welfare room for the street cleansing member of staff. So the idea is to insert a loo for disabled users in the far end, which will make sense if I show you the pictures. So the elevation facing the southern elevation facing the recreation ground, there'll be a door inserted to get into the disabled loo, and it's to serve people using that actual recreation area rather than people driving into Mill Street and parking there haphazardly and using it, as is the concern of some one local resident. That's the floor plan, so you can see that there's going to be actually a loo inserted in that part of the building. It's currently a restroom, so a door inserted with a ramp and then ability for a disabled person to use that facility. So we would recommend approval for it. We don't think it's going to cause any amenity issues for the nearby residents. And the door is actually shielded from the residents' properties by the building itself. It's on the elevation facing the recreation ground. So we consider it acceptable and recommend approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. Councillor Clark, Usk locality, do you wish to comment?
No, I've no problem with that, Mr. Chairman.
Right, thank you. Right, thank you. So show of hands for approval then, please. That's unanimous, and I will now leave the chamber because there's an application now on page 91, 00593, and I'll leave this in the capable of hands of my Vice Chair. Thank you.
Andrew? Philip, is it? Andrew. Carry on, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, this application relates to an established agricultural holding known as Whitehall Farm, located to the south of Whitehall Lane in Rockville. So you can see the site there. Already comprises a large number of modern agricultural buildings, with the main dwelling positioned there to the west, where you can see the pinpoint. So full planning permission is sought for a new standalone storage building that would be used for hay and straw. This would be located to the south, as you can see on the screen, of the existing building. So it would measure 30.5 metres in length, 15.15 metres in width, and stand 8.13 metres to the ridge, finished with fibre cement sheets to the roof and Yorkshire boarding to the walls. In terms of our detailed consideration, then it's contained within the existing established group, which all relevant policies in the LDP seek to contain new builds where justified for agriculture into groups. There's no third-party objection to the scheme. It's only before us owing to the applicant being an elected member. And in terms of any impact on residential parties, it's only to be used for storage of hay and straw rather than livestock. However, the nearest dwelling is approximately 0.36 miles away. So it's considered to be satisfactorily grouped together. There's no third-party amenity impact, and therefore is recommended for approval.
Councillor Feekins.
I'd be happy to move for approval, Chair.
Yeah, second that, Chair.
Oh, I don't know. Is there an email from the applicant we need to read out? Right, all those for approval, please show. Okay. That brings us to the end of today's planning committee. Yes, it's been a pleasure seeing you all, and I'll bring the chairman back in now to close the meeting.
I think that concludes the meeting for the afternoon, unless there's anybody got anything wish to say. I think it's been rather a busy and eventful afternoon, especially with a lot of public here and then have to go home, which was very unfortunate. So I wish you all a restful couple of weeks before we're next on planning. Thank you.
Can I just make one point? We cannot put...
Thank you, Councillor Davis.
We cannot put the people of Caldicot through a process as we've done this afternoon. We cannot do that. We're going to have to make sure that we've got enough members here at the next time we present it. So I don't know how we're going to do that, but we cannot ask people to turn, 20 people to turn up and then send them all home without a decision. It does not reflect well on us.
I think we have to take responsibility that we should always give apologies to make sure that we are quorate, no matter what meeting it is. And it was completely wrong this afternoon and very embarrassing and doesn't put us in a good light for those, for any sort of applicant has got a large or minor application in front of the planning committee. So I think we should all be very mindful and learn lessons from it. But on the whole, I've always said the planning committee has been very, very good in its attendance, but we are too short anyway, and we're trying to address that as well. So thank you all for your attendance this afternoon. Councillor Powell?
Could it be put, when the planning notification goes out, could there be a paragraph or sentence at the bottom saying, please notify yes or no, this is very important? Because, you know,
I must say, Councillor Powell, that when I first became a member of this Monmouthshire County Council, I brought it to full council and not all agreed, but I said apologies should always be given if you cannot attend a meeting, and I think that is highlighted desperately this afternoon. So thank you, and I now close the meeting.
Madam
Thank
Chair,
you.
it's not just apologies, it's people who's got to declare an interest as well.